Centre. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Gadigal land, land over which sovereignty was never ceded, land marked by violent dispossession. Meeting here at the university to learn from each other, we acknowledge this place as a site on which learning and exchange of knowledge and information has taken place over centuries. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to University of Sydney's annual Shakespeare Memorial Lecture, sponsored, as Anna said, by the Create Centre, a centre whose aim is to pursue the connections between creativity and learning. Even more exciting, I get to introduce this year's wonderful speaker. Picture this. It was January last year, towards the end of one of the lockdowns, I forget which. But my partner and I had thought that one of the things we'd been missing was live theatre. Living as we do up in the Blue Mountains, we were not sure that we fancied a trip to the Big Bag City just yet, but Parramatta's not so far away. What's happening at the riverside, we thought. Our foggy lockdown brains just about managed to book a ticket for a Saturday matinee performance of Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore. Now, Gilbert and Sullivan on a humid, rain-sodden Saturday afternoon might not have been a dream ticket, but I'd heard about this Siren Theatre production and that it was all to go, so I thought we'd give it a go, and oh my God, how fantastic it was. As the production threw the conventions of stage musicals up into the air and allowed them to fall in the queerest of places. The songs were all there, songs that I vaguely remembered from my one only stage performance as a sailor boy in the chorus at the tender age of 12. But the underpinning jingoism of the piece was eviscerated in a riot of colour, cross-dressing and general mischief. It was a glorious emergence from lockdown. At the heart of it all was a performance by the brilliant actor Thomas Campbell as Buttercup, poor little Buttercup. Funny and alive, this was an astonishingly queer presence to welcome us back to the theatre. And then my slow brain started to catch up, reminding me that the first time that I'd seen Thomas Campbell on stage, slowly putting two and two together and realising, of course, that this was the same director as well. And that director is our speaker today. I was taken back and reminded of what I think was the first Shakespeare production that I saw when I first moved to Sydney, which was Kate Gaul's production of Richard III at the Carriage Works in 2009, a show that persuaded me that I might not have made such a bad choice for somewhere to live after all. Again, at its heart was Thomas Campbell, and Kate situated his electrifying performance in a truly dynamic production of Richard III, one that I don't think I've ever seen bettered. Drawing out its ferocity, its sublime horror, and its brutal humour. It's a production of the play that lives in my memory, convincing me, for all my many doubts, it is sometimes still worth performing Shakespeare. And of course, Kate Gaul's work in this area, in the area of Shakespeare, is extensive, including an acclaimed production in 2011 of As You Like It, again with Siren Theatre. And more recently, I take it this will inform her lecture tonight, a production of Benjamin Britten and Peter Pear's operatic version of A Midsummer Night's Dream in collaboration with NIDA and the Conservatorium. So, theatre director, opera director, artistic director of Siren Theatre, and multi-talented creative force for good in the world. Please welcome, with her talk, Bottom's Dream, Interpretation, Context and Directors of Shakespeare, Kate Gaul.
Hugh, we've only met on email, but I feel that's the best introduction I've ever had. Thank you very much. And Thomas Campbell sends his best wishes. He's currently in Europe. Otherwise, he would be here. I might have got him to do something. Thank you very much. I too would like to acknowledge that we meet today on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. And a warning, during the lecture I named 2 Indigenous actors who have now passed. This is an incredible honour to prepare this lecture. Directing a Shakespearean play is a huge undertaking. To support my thoughts on the matter, I refer to both English and Australian productions. I do so in the knowledge that there is a wealth of creativity, thought and practice from America and non-English speaking worlds of Europe and Asia. But that would have to be another lecture, I think. Let's go back to the 70s. The 1970 Royal Shakespeare Company's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream was directed by Peter Brook. It was taken on a world tour in 1972 to 1973. Brook's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream for the Royal Shakespeare Company is often described as one of the 20th century's most influential productions of Shakespeare, as it rejected many traditional ideas about the staging of classic drama. There's so much written about this production, and if you're encountering mention of it for the first time, I encourage your curiosity. In a nutshell, Brook's desire was to liberate the production from bad tradition so that actors and audience could feel they were encountering the text for the first time. As such, he avoided any realistic scenery or props. Instead, the set was designed by Sally Jacobs. It was a simple white box with no ceiling and 2 doors. In Stratford, black drapes were hung above the box to hide the machinery. On tour, Brook decided to remove them, leaving technicians and lighting fixtures all visible. The purpose of this was to return the stage to the simplicity of the Elizabethan theatre, in which there was little scenery and the sense of location was generated by the poet's words. However, this approach was blended with modern elements. The trees of the forest were represented by giant slinky toys, and Titania's bower was a suspended huge feather, red feather. At the beginning of my journey to become a director and digging into the rich imaginative worlds of Shakespearean production, I came across a letter that appeared in the Times of London on the 13th of October 1971. In the controversy that followed Peter Brook's, what we now consider brilliant and astonishing A Midsummer Night's Dream, Jonathan Miller wrote, "Your correspondents who attack Peter Brook's dream have systematically misconceived the task of the theatrical director, and by implication therefore have failed to understand the relationship that exists between tradition and the individual talent. According to them, the director should modestly efface their own personality and allow the text to speak for itself. One might sympathise with this dogma if the text in question contained, in addition to the speeches that comprise it, additional clues which specified the sort of diction could count. Given the fact that Shakespeare left no collateral instructions, it's hard to imagine how one would ever know that one was in the presence of a version wherein the text was speaking for itself. How would the characters speak in such a performance? What accents would they use? And where would the proper emphasis fall? How would the cast stand and what would they be dressed in? What does a fairy look like? And in what way do their utterances differ from those of the ordinary mortals? Even if the author were alive to tell us, it seems doubtful whether he would be able to give a satisfactory answer to all these questions. And even if he were able to stand up and object to certain interpretations of his own text, it seems quite likely, from what one knows of living authors, that he might be pleasantly surprised by other equally startling departures from the orthodox version. The mystery of Shakespeare's genius, in fact, lies in the fact that innumerable performances of his plays can be rendered, few of which are closely compatible with one another, most of which, however, are at least congruent with the speeches as written. Since we can never know which one of these corresponds with Shakespeare's original intention, the director must satisfy themselves with the task of trying to improvise a set of people who could all convincingly mean something by the speeches assigned to them. In order to do this, the director may put the play into an entirely novel circumstance. The point is that the act of dramatic interpretation consists of a journey backwards through time in the effort to find some significant historical ground upon which to raise an eloquent representation of human conflict. Success is then rated not by the degree to which the performance approximates to an entirely unknowable state of Shakespeare's mind, but by the extent to which the text now speaks with more or less coherent vitality. What was a fairy to the Elizabethan audience? Few of us believe in fairies now, and yet there's something intriguing about the concept of a supernatural world that lies beyond the reach of common sense. With the passage of time, Shakespeare's plays have quite properly assumed the status of myths, and it is the honourable fate of all great myths to suffer imaginative distortions at the hands of those to whom they continue to give consolation and nourishment. The story of Oedipus existed before Sophocles changed it, and when Freud incorporated the tale into his theory of family conflict, he was merely adding another substantial chapter to a tale whose telling can never be finished. So let it be with Shakespeare." Unquote. It was long. It was worth reading, and I cut that a bit. I found this an eloquent and striking statement of the licence a director demands for their art. Let us take the assertion, as it is often still phrased, that the directors should permit the text to speak for itself. That's impossible. As we know, Shakespeare, the text, is a massive variable, and it's altogether unclear which extant versions represent Shakespeare, the man's, final thoughts. There are no stage directions. What directions exist are usually limited to straightforward details of entrances and exits and factual statements of non-verbal actions. Throws him a purse, and so on. There is nothing at all corresponding to the interpretive italics of a contemporary play. What we have are the words and the major actions, nothing more. In production, the texts are often not presented in their complete versions because of the length. Twelfth Night, or the Scottish play, as it's superstitiously called, can be played in their entirety, but Hamlet or King Lear. And then we have the words of the text as chosen, to be delivered by actors who have certain physical characteristics, who are dressed in a certain way, who speak their lines with a certain emphasis. Any director of Shakespeare will attest to the pitfalls and excitement that the words present. My experience is that speakers of English assume a fairly good familiarity with most of Shakespearean's vocabulary. Actors save the work for the difficult or obscure terms. As research and in the rehearsal room, we pore over glossaries to find out what centuries of scholarly labour have made available. We discover the meanings of such words as canker blossom and dispunge. We probably don't think to look up the words honour or neglect. There's nothing to look up, but that's an error. We still use these words and they still have similar meanings, but they rest on assumptions that have long grown obsolete or changed radically. A good example of this is the word court. The Elizabethan sense of court was the centre of power or government. We can imagine it in, say, Richard III as a dangerous, politically charged place where the machinations of loyalty and betrayal take place. But if we're doing A Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, or As You Like It, we should remember that it means the same thing. The resonances are there in the text waiting to be sounded. Detail is the key here. What is a soldier? What is the court? What does a fairy look like? Meaning for an audience emerges from complex events, and there's no escaping the responsibility for directing, that is, determining what these events are. Jonathan Miller's question goes to the heart of the matter. What does a fairy look like? Most of Shakespeare's plays contain a supernatural element which must be interpreted for an audience. Fairies, witches and sprites are rooted in the culture of a nation, and I will guess are very far removed from what an Elizabethan audience imagined as a fairy. As there is no correct translation of fairy for modern audiences, the imaginative leap must be made by each director. The director, in my mind, has three key responsibilities when presenting a play of Shakespeare. They choose the play, they determine which text will be said, and they create the metaphoric world or vehicle for the production, the ambience and resonances generated by the production design. This will be done by a team of creatives, but as the director must ultimately take responsibility for a production's metaphors, ambience and resonances, I consider this a central decision. A word on concept here. I describe concept as the unifying creative vision for the elements of a production. It allows the language and all the design, set, costumes, lighting, sound, movement, to mutually support one creative goal. Concept means that in pointing to a particular set of national and historical circumstances via the costumes for the sake of discussion, the director marks or reveals close and striking affinities with the realities of the text. Let's ignore for a moment the plays on the school syllabus or the handful of Shakespeare's plays that mean secure box office for a company, and consider how plays grouped as, say, The War of the Roses or the singular Julius Caesar and Coriolanus, for example, reflect similarities with dictatorship and class conflict, or the Game of Thrones in the case of the Plantagenets and the Tudors. The meaning, the thrust of the plays, radically changes, and interest in various plays comes and goes with the flux of politics. Some plays await for audiences. Troilus and Cressida has been seen as a play of our times, with its surprisingly modern interrogation of leadership, civic responsibility and political will. Measure for Measure is another one. The history of Shakespeare on the stage is full of instances where plays neglected for years are suddenly re-established as centres of contemporary interest. If a director chooses a play that's already popular, they have the chance to bring some aspect of it to light that may not be commonly understood, and therefore demonstrate that this is a play for today. For example, Neil Armfield's production of The Tempest in the mid-1990s made an indelible impression on me as a young Tasmanian. It was a searing post-colonial interpretation with the late Kevin Smith as an Indigenous Caliban. I'd not then encountered the notion of decolonisation in the theatre, although I believe in Europe that The Tempest had been interpreted thus for decades before. My only previous encounter with the play was an outdoors version, which emphasised magic and the existence of our trapped spirits. I'm also reminded of the impact of casting the late Bob Mazza as the banished Duke, also in a Neil Armfield production of As You Like It, from around the same time. In selecting the play, the director guides the audience to an area of contemporary consciousness and enlarges our understanding of what that play can mean. The selection of play governs the next decision, which is determining the play text. Cutting should emphasise a certain quality, a certain source of vitality in the full original. This is not to say and not to deny that cutting can be brutal. Its function is nonetheless to illuminate the original text. In my own production of Richard III, I used two guiding principles to establish the play text. Firstly, I wanted to emphasise Richard's relationship to the women in the play. While the four central female women in Shakespeare's text lack political influence and independence, they wield intense emotional force and speak a vigorous, powerful language. Anne, Queen Margaret, the Duchess and Queen Elizabeth were the emotional core of the production. While male characters mostly negotiate political action, the women articulate the emotional tolls those actions take and bring the play to life for the audience. Secondly, I needed to bring the production in under 2 hours. Yes, it was on the school syllabus, and the bus timetables were of paramount importance. We also only had a cast of 6. The challenges are clear. Cuts of a certain magnitude are necessarily a phase in adapting, even rewriting, the original text. In creating the world of the play, the director reveals an entire philosophy for the production. In general terms, the key possibilities are perhaps a historical setting, a modern setting, or an eclectic production. Each has its own rationale. Let's think about historical productions. Setting Shakespeare in an historical period, in Australia I think that would mean early 20th century and beyond, it's fallen out of favour pretty much. However, it is sometimes seen, and it's certainly more vibrant in the UK. It makes it easier for directors to establish and create a social hierarchy of kings, queens, nobles and lower classes, and it avoids some of the challenges of anachronisms. The modern approach, well, I think this is a great approach. It guarantees positive results as it breaks through the mental barrier existing for many between the kings and the queens and the present day. It always feels authentic. For those who know a play well, they'll be gripped by each piece of modern translation the director introduces. It communicates directly to an audience and instantly engages. Against this, there are some losses. A part of the original text will make no sense at all. References to swords, horses, clothes, sack, and so on must be cut, ignored, or left as a possible distracting presence. Malvolio's cross-gartered yellow stockings come to mind. Sometimes there is a direct and irreconcilable conflict between the text and the overt physicalised translation into the modern. The danger is always that an immediate point can be made vividly and tellingly, but cannot be sustained by the remainder of the text. Then we have the eclectic version, returning back to Peter Brook for a moment, who said consistency of costuming was the enemy. He wished to create via his costumes provocations that identify themselves with no one era or national situation. The necessity is that everything visual in a Shakespeare production should not confine the audience to a single attitude and a single interpretation, unquote. This desire to keep the options open is characteristic of today. Eclecticism can be as narrow gauge or as wide-ranging across a production or within a character journey. Going back to Richard III for a moment, the men in my production wore versions of modern military fatigues and the women wore glamorous gowns. The final battle between Richmond and Richard was carried out using swords, and when actors weren't playing named characters in a scene, there was a sense of ensemble of ghosts overlooking the action, and they wore off-white and floaty sort of garments. Established early in the production, these ghosts reached their apotheosis in the night before Richard's final battle. When I directed As You Like It, the court scenes were played with a 1950s silhouette, reflecting a perceived sense of restriction and also a heightened and delineated femininity for the women. Once we moved to the Forest of Arden, the stage became a world of clowns and circus, drawing on the paintings and drawings of Georges Seurat and his contemporaries. In all this, the role of the designer has barely been mentioned. It's obvious that productions at a major, highly subsidised company offer brilliant opportunities for the designer. The large companies have both the means and the need to fill large stages and satisfy audience expectation to some extent. It's common to find director-designer teams who collaborate on determining and describing the world of the play, formulating a concept together. But whatever the scale of the production, the director takes responsibility as the central artistic entrepreneur. In my opinion, the director must have both respect and a healthy disrespect for the work at hand, and demonstrate a loyalty rather than a fidelity to the text. Shakespeare creates the world and continually reveals it to us. My job as a director is to take care of the conditions of the space and time and pay attention to the ethics and overall direction of those gathered together. I want to talk about English director Emma Rice. It's impossible to imagine a current British theatrical landscape without Emma Rice. Emma Rice is currently the artistic director of a theatre company called Wise Children. She trained as an actor. She joined the innovative touring company Knee High, based in Cornwall. In 2003, she created her landmark and long-running production, The Red Shoes, which cemented her reputation as an outstanding creative theatre. It played here at the Seymour Centre, as did Tristan and Isolde, which she also directed. I think they were both part of the Sydney festivals in days long gone. In 2016, Rice took up her appointment as artistic director at the Globe. No small achievement, considering how few opportunities of this magnitude fall to women, and indeed it was the first time the Globe had appointed a woman to the post. Her exciting first season, called The Wonder Season, was a huge success, certainly as far as box office returns and audience satisfaction was concerned. Her brilliant and uproarious production of A Midsummer Night's Dream was one of the most sought after tickets in London. For anyone who was watching at home, we know that there was controversy that ensued. The powers that be wanted her to change the way she made work, and this wasn't an option for Emma Rice. Integrity, process, people, and ultimately freedom were at stake. She eventually left her contract at the Globe early. But what did she achieve with the brilliant A Midsummer Night's Dream? Rice demonstrated her ability to produce exceptional, inclusive and innovative theatre and to push the boundaries of the contemporary stage with Shakespeare. As I said, her inaugural season, called The Wonder Season, opened with Dream, exploring love, identity and magic. A quick recap. Written in 1595, A Midsummer Night's Dream is one of the most joyful, chaotic and enigmatic plays ever written. The course of true love never did run smooth. A feuding fairy king and queen of the forest cross paths with 4 runaway lovers and a troupe of actors rehearsing a play. As their dispute grows, the magical immortal couple meddle with mortal lives, leading to love triangles, mistaken identities and transformations with hilarious but dark consequences. This is one of Shakespeare's greatest romantic comedies and one of the greatest romantic comedies of all time. Emma Rice is reported to have chosen the play as it harks back to the wonder, as a child, of a family visit to Stratford in the snow to see a magical dream with puppets as fairies. She totally fell in love with the magic and wanted to bring it to a London audience, but firmly set it in the 21st century. So what did she do with the text? Emma Rice worked with playwright and dramaturg Tanika Gupta to edit and reshape the text. It's a light touch adaptation, and I think you'll get the flavour for it as I proceed. Together they created lyrics, added modern references and interludes into Shakespeare's text, actively working against purist inclinations. One challenge that haunted this director was the character of Helena's arc. If you recall, Helena asks Demetrius to beat her, that she will be his spaniel, and the more that she's beaten, the more that she will love him. Demetrius violently threatens her. Emma Rice could not support the notion that we would want Helena and Demetrius in their relationship to succeed. She didn't want a woman to say that she would be a dog and to be beaten and love you more. This was a challenge that no spell on the planet could solve. How can we celebrate the marriage at the end of the play? So Emma Rice and her collaborators turned Helena into Helenus, a man. Could the text support this shift? Both director and dramaturg scoured the text and found that it could. In hindsight, and with the success of the idea, the shift seems so obvious. Helenus is Hermia's quintessential gay best friend, sincere, sassy and altogether endearing. His lamentations on the friendly rivalry with Hermia held revised meanings in the production, as Helenus's frustrations were newly attributed to Demetrius's mixed orientation, whose interest in both Hermia and Helenus positioned Demetrius's character as a young man exploring his sexuality. Demetrius denies he is gay and rejects Helenus. Helenus hangs in there as if he's saying, I know you love me, I know you are gay, I know this is something we can fight for. We are in a world where people are put to death if they marry the wrong person. We are in a world where bad things happen to people who don't play by the rules. And in the case of the play, death. So the stakes were going right through the ceiling. When the couple kissed at the wedding ceremony at the end, the audience response was wild. The search for true love with a genuine threat over it propelled the production. Emma Rice still faced the problem of, if you want to put it this way, drugging and sexual assault. Her solutions aren't dealt with as forcefully as the Helena dilemma. Australian actor Meow Meow played the Hippolyta Titania double. To my mind, Meow Meow does an astute job at touching on the cost of love and the victimisation of women with a sense of strength and glamour in her acting. The production begins. A woman dressed in denim overalls labelled with the logo Shakespeare's Globe walks through the groundlings of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, climbs onto the stage and begins to relay a humorous catalogue of theatre regulations. She proceeds to point the audience to members of the Globe crew, interspersed between the crowd, and introduces herself as Rita Quince, another gender-swapped character in the production. Towards the end of her speech, Theseus's master of the revels, Philostrate, appears on stage to shoo off Quince and the rest of the crew and call out for music to begin, signalling the start of the performance, Act 1, Scene 1 of Shakespeare's play. This opening sequence creates a seamless transition from reality to performance which came upon the oblivious audience like a dream. Time in the play world collapses into the real time of the audience's world in a way that firmly locates the narrative in the here and now of present-day London, highlighting the notion of the contemporary that is central to Rice's modern retelling of Shakespeare's dream. The production releases the meta-theatrical aspects of the text in new ways. The prologue, as I've described, seems to be a routine WHS announcement on behalf of employees of Shakespeare's Globe, wearing the aprons and matching blue Shakespeare's Globe t-shirts. Only in the second scene, when the rude mechanicals enter, it's revealed that the aforementioned health and safety officer, Rita Quince, cleaner and Robin, who has the snacks, are in fact the performers acting the roles of the mechanicals. The play within a play of the original text traditionally draws attention to the role of the imagination in theatre, asking the audience to question what their eyes can see, much like the lovers do at the morning after their night in the woods. The very literal Shakespeare's Globe setting to the mechanicals' actions allows for a both literal and meta-exploration of the same thoughts, lending to the psychedelic tone of the production. Another important motif in the production that both complicates and enriches the play's contemporary reimagining is the exotic image of India. Rice uses Indian elements throughout the performance, creating an aesthetic backdrop to supplement the Londonised portrayal of the narrative. The duality between modern London and Shakespeare's pre-modern vision of India were at the heart of this performance and are both correspondingly reflected in the set design and the music for the production. The Globe stage is adorned with streams of orange flowers resembling marigold garlands and frame a seated musician. She's beautifully dressed in traditional Indian clothing with flowers in her hair and a sitar against her body. Positioned above the sitar player's window is a bright red neon sign with the words "Rock the Ground," taken from Shakespeare's text. Throughout the performance, the sitar player is accompanied by other musicians in performing rock Indian music melody fusions to enhance the action on stage. The production's attention to Indian identity included a decision to cast Indian and South Asian actors in the roles of major characters in the play, and this helps represent the multiculturalism of contemporary London. Parsi Indian-British actor Zubin Vala played the roles of Theseus and Oberon, while their counterparts, Hippolyta and Titania, were enacted by white Australian performer Meow Meow. Similarly, both Hermia and the gender-swapped Helena, here Helenus, were played by actors of Indian and South Asian heritage, and the so-called Hoxton hipsters, Demetrius and Lysander, were performed by black actor Nakuti Gatwa and white actor Edmund Derrington, respectively. The variety of these characters make the production's recreation of London convincing by emphasising the diversity of the city's wider community, which is inclusive of a range of different races, nations, religions, genders and sexualities. Rice has spoken of her Orientalist reasoning, which has also come in for some intense criticism, as you can imagine. But her production joins a list of contemporary Anglo-British dreams. Some of you may have seen the celebrated Tim Supple production at the Sydney Theatre in 2006, I think. Sidebar. In Emma Rice's inaugural season at the Globe, women made up 45% of her casts. Some critics have dismissed Rice as one of those crowd of self-satisfied gender-bending social engineers. But others have found her experiments with gender, including turning Helena into Helenus in Midsummer Night's Dream, revelatory. But let's face it, in her intelligent approach to casting, Emma Rice continues a long tradition of gender experimentation in Shakespeare's performances. "Why is everybody so obsessed with text?" cries Robin Starveling in this production. Dressed as in an astronaut suit to imitate moonshine, they charge at the heckling patron Theseus of the play within a play. This throwaway line might as well serve as the motto for Rice's transgressive and innovative production of Dream. Indeed, the traditional text is but suggestive in Rice's production, a 3-hour spectacle that interpolates popular music, features original lyrics and interjected moments. It's a raucous musical spectacular. And what does a fairy look like? Well, Rice says, Shakespeare gave birth to them, so they've been around for about 400 years. And I thought, what would you be like if you'd been at every party, done every drug and were absolutely wrecked? That kind of rough thrill seekers. Many of us have seen innumerable versions of A Midsummer Night's Dream across our lives. I guess why we see it so often is that deep down the play really connects. It's romantic, there's a belief in love, and in Emma Rice's production it becomes a piece in which we can all believe in love. The mechanicals are so touching. They are the beating heart of the piece. We laugh in recognition of good people doing their best. Ordinary people with a little bit of magic is a marvellous thing. A director may be the love child of Rita Quince and Bully Bottom. At the end of 2021, the NIDA MFA directing students of that year mounted short plays of their choosing. Director Madeline Dickens worked with writing alumna Sophie Davis and dramaturg Barbara Taylor and designer Amy Jackson to create a 40-minute version of the Scottish play. Together, these women went some way to answering what is Shakespeare today. The Scottish play was first performed in or around 1606 and dramatises the damaging physical and psychological effects of political ambition on those who seek power for its own sake. A brave Scottish general named Macbeth receives a prophecy from a trio of witches that one day he will become King of Scotland. Consumed by ambition and spurred into action by his wife, Macbeth murders King Duncan and takes the Scottish throne for himself. He's then racked with guilt and paranoia, forcing him to commit more and more murders to protect himself from enmity and suspicion. He soon becomes a tyrannical ruler. The bloodbath and consequent civil war swiftly take Macbeth and Lady Macbeth into the realms of madness and death. Whatever the playing time audiences are expecting in this program of emerging artists, whatever the speed of performance, Shakespearean text has always been cut and always will be. But what to cut? The playing version that a director or team selects, such as this creative team, always bears the imprint of their aesthetics, politics and so on. Once again, Shakespeare at his simplest formulation of words and actions must be governed by many points by the director. There's no other authority to whom we can appeal. As I've said, meaning is generated by an audience, a community and history. The audience does not stare blankly at a set of images and words. Thus, the director enters the audience's bloodstream, aware of the images that compose the past and present of a community, its felt history. This production at the Reg Grundy studio, which was designed, a banner above a corner stage proclaimed, as the Burnham Woods RSL Pageant Championships, DJ Porter, one of the 2 male actors work alongside 6 women, scratched a version of Men at Work's Down Under as pre-show music. 3 staff, we later discover these are the weird workers, generally seat people amongst the cabaret-style tables and set up. You've guessed it, we're not in for a traditional night of Shakespeare. The ominous glow of the red glitter curtain, the plinth with winner's statuette declares there will be blood on the dance floor, heath, once the pageant's lost and won. Let me describe why and how I interpret this team led by Madeline Dickens made the decisions they did. It's possible that the team of women chose this very male play to critique the challenge to masculinity that Lady M and the 3 witches present to both the male characters in the play and the audience. It could be that they wish to subvert the relentless stereotypes, embedded production trends and traditional attitudes to the Australian cultural narratives surrounding Shakespeare. Maybe they wanted to reinstate agency to Shakespeare's women, where they often have the least amount of agency. Women usually have no direct power but must act through their husbands. Or they could have dreamt of a stage where women were given the greatest soliloquies. Beth and Banquo are 13-year-old besties, competing tonight against Queen Duncan in 3 rounds of spectacular choreography. Identically costumed in pink sequined and rhinestone-encrusted leotards. Queen Duncan is a confident blonde with a diamante crown which she adds to the statuette for the winner. The weird workers have already revealed their predictions to Beth and Banquo and the evening gets underway. What nobody counts on is that Beth has a show mum. She receives an email from Beth, her dearest partner of greatness, and we learn of the deep and dark desires Beth feels as the competition draws near. The raven is indeed hoarse, as the whammy of slow burn blonde and Botox ambition meets dance marathon in a most unsettling combination of elements. Sounds like the Scottish play. Now we know Madeline and the team only have 40 minutes to contract Shakespeare's shortest play. Her central focus is story, story, story. Minor bits and pieces have enough Shakespeare to make us all feel smart, Yes, there are modern references and contractions. Violence happens mainly off stage, and the characters deal with the consequences. This is occasionally Shakespeare light, but this is not a parody. The production and cast earn the awaited speeches. The image of a dancewear teen speaking Shakespeare's texts is one of the ways this company makes Shakespeare completely new for today. Absolutely arresting. There's a touch of rough magic about the production, but these actors aren't fumbling amateurs. These are gifted emerging artists with refined verse-speaking technique. The team demonstrates a sensibility for and ability to work with heightened language. Our director does not skimp on the challenge here, rightfully, thankfully. Rivals are done away with and the dance-offs continue, along with the requisite hauntings as conscience gets the better of the women. The relationship between Beth and her show mum disintegrates. The sleepwalking scene is transmuted into a Lynchian stand-up, a routine without punchlines, a mind infected by her daughter's unnatural deed. It is smart, coolly funny, and very moving. You get the idea about what the production Beth looked and felt like. The Burnham Wood RSL comes complete with a fleeting meat raffle. There's a DJ Porter rap between deaths, there's words about weather, and the occasional aforementioned stand-up. In the hands of this director, Madeline Dickens, who's actually here today, Shakespeare's tragedy is subverted into a stunning black comedy about mother-daughter relationships, female empowerment and filicide. It reveals a startling play about ambition and existential madness. The final image of a show mum surrounded by the victims of her ambition, born of a culture obsessed by status, power and greed, is chilling. A once potent mover and shaker is silhouetted by light alone, her daughter dead at her feet, still, now quiet, grasping for opportunity. It's very dark, just for a moment. Beth is a production that creates female stories without any relation to men in a world that has changed and continues to change. It critiques the male tradition of Shakespeare without losing any of Shakespeare's power. It questions what is privileged, what is silenced, and what is reduced or invalidated by tradition, or clumsy and unthinking productions that continue to centralise both men on stage and off. In Sydney in 2021, a company of young women challenged what many have settled for. This is artistic abundance in this. There is artistic abundance in this dream. Don't wake me up. I also got to play with Shakespeare at the end of last year. A Midsummer Night's Dream, the operatic version, composed by Benjamin Britten with libretto adapted by Britten and Peter Pears. There are other operas based on Shakespeare's plays, but Britten's Dream is Shakespeare's text set to music, not a vague translation or adaptation. Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream is imbued with the spirit of music, heard or implied, his text exploring the grey areas between the spoken and sung. The opera premiered in 1960 at the Aldeburgh Festival, for which it was written. Stylistically, this work is typical of Britten, with a highly individual sound world, not strikingly dissonant or atonal, but replete with subtly atmospheric harmonies and tone painting. The role of Oberon was composed for countertenor Alfred Deller. This is one of Britten's innovations. It's extremely rare in opera that the lead role is written for a countertenor to sing. In fact, Britten was the first composer ever to write an operatic role specifically for a countertenor as opposed to a castrato. Britten's encyclopedic knowledge of music history is revealed in irreverent pastiches of Balfe, Sullivan, Bellini, Donizetti and Verdi. The noisy guffaws of Shakespeare's audiences at the Globe Theatre are an equally appropriate response to Britten's opera for those in the know. This work requires a unique balance in the director-conductor relationship. Any stage director can be in awe of Shakespeare's iconic text, and their role is, at least in part, to defend the integrity of the text in the opera theatre, a place where text often disappears as the soprano rises towards the stratospheres. Likewise, any conductor can only be in awe of Britten's world-scale musical conception of the drama. A closeness of working with the complex dramaturgy that ensues provides an incredibly rewarding experience in exploring the cross-pollination of these musical, literary and theatrical worlds, colliding and conjoining into the inevitably messy world of opera. Britten and Pears reduced the length of Shakespeare's original text by around 2/3 and added a single line of their own. The result is a unique work, an opera composed to actual Shakespearean text. Britten delineated the three tiers of characters, the rustics being given the folk-like simple music, the lovers a more romantic sound, and the fairies being represented in a very ethereal way. Almost all the action takes place in the woods around Athens, and the fairies inhabit a much more prominent place in the drama of the opera. Britten conceived the fairies as a chorus of boy sopranos. Now, mine was a co-production with the Sydney Conservatorium of Music and NIDA. The opera students need roles, so we replaced the children's chorus with 5 sopranos, women. In the darkness, the overture takes us into a luscious waking dream. The curtain lifts slowly on a forest and the fairies. The image is far from the innocent juxtaposition that Britten imagined, but as a frame, it did set the tone for sensuality that propelled the production. These fairies moved slowly through the forest in draped metal sheaths and elaborate headdresses made from twisted willow. All this is to set the scene for our interlude this afternoon. 2 young opera singers, Claudia Mackay and Michael Burden, accompanied by Renkaju, present excerpts from the opera. Claudia sings Titania, as she is called in the opera, and Michael the role of Oberon. Please welcome them to the stage. So, the opening chorus of the opera sets the scene for the entrance of the warring king and queen of the fairies, Titania and Oberon.
His mother was a votress of my order, but she, being mortal, of that boy did die. And for her sake I will not part with him. Boy, and I will go and with for her sake I will not part with him. Boy, and I will not go with him. I will go with him. Kingdom. Fairies, away, away, away. Well, go thy way. Thou shalt not from this grove till I torment thee for this injury. My gentle Puck, come hither, come hither. Thou rememberest the me once. The juice of it on sleeping eyelids laid will make or man or woman madly dote upon the next live creature that it sees. Be it on lion, bear, or wolf, or bull, on meddling monkey, or busy ape. Fetch me this herb, and be thou here again, ere the Leviathan can swim a league. Having once this juice, I'll watch Titania when she is asleep, and drop the liquor of it in her eyes. And ere I take this charm from off her sight, I'll make her render up her page to me.
Puck does indeed gather the magic flower, and he brings it back to Oberon as instructed.
Welcome, wanderer. Hast thou the flower there? I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where rock sleeps and the nodding violet grows. Quite over-canopied with luscious woodbine, with sweet musk roses, and with eglantine. There sleeps Titania sometime of the night, lulled in these flowers with dances and delight. And there the snake throws her enameled skin. Weed wide enough to wrap a fairy in. And with the juice of this I'll streak her eyes, and make her full of hateful fantasies of Take thou some of it, and seek through this grove. A sweet Athenian lady is in love with a disdainful youth. Anoint his eyes, but do it when the next thing he espies may be the lady. Thou shalt know the man by the Athenian garments he hath on.
In another part of the forest, Titania entreats her fairy troupe to play music to send her to sleep.
make no stay. Meet me all by break of day.
Just yet, everyone, because we'd like to open up this space for the opportunity to ask questions of both our illustrious speaker, but also the musicians, if you wish. And to facilitate this, may I invite Hugh back up? So please take a little space to find out things you would want to know.
Fatal flaw in this panel, I can't see it.
It's very nice. Maybe we can bring up the house. That's better.
Thank you very much. Questions they want to ask? I'm sure that was food for a lot of thought.
Wow.
Then I'll start.
Oh, well, we can chat amongst ourselves. Yeah.
Keep going for next time. I was really struck, Kate, by the way that you talked about the powerful adaptations of Emma Rice and Peter Brook, and about your own, and about how they were treading a fine, they were not parodies, that there's something else going on. And I was wondering about what work has to be involved to ensure that that's the case. And it seemed to be almost as if, I was also, to be honest, thinking about your work on HMS Pinafore as well, it's almost as if you have to know the text better than people who just assume that the text will speak for itself. You have to know what's at stake in the text.
I think fidelity is the word that I used was you can have a healthy disrespect, but you must be absolutely sort of, your fidelity has to be really high. To go back to say something like Pinafore, which is my direct experience, is we played that absolutely straight. It was absolutely straight. There was not, apart from Buttercup, and Tom was the only one who was allowed to change the words, everyone did exactly the text that had been written. And we didn't make any cuts because it's actually quite a short operetta, so it didn't need to be cut. I mean, I would say somebody like Emma Rice, she quite famously took the post at the Globe saying that she hadn't really had a lot of experience with Shakespeare, either as a scholar or a theatre practitioner, but yet many people had suggested to her that Midsummer Night's Dream was a play that she would direct very well, given her kind of theatre-making processes and her sense of play, and her sort of very light touch when it comes to, I guess, creating very contemporary scenarios, which I think all of her work does, even sometimes when it's in make-believe kind of worlds. So, for example, she would have taken great counsel from her dramaturg, and when they wanted to change Helena to Helenus, I mean, it's her words that they scoured the text. So I think what she did, it wasn't done blithely, because, the worst thing is it can be great for one scene and then it dies in the next. So you're really thinking of the whole journey, aren't you? You can't, and look, with Gilbert and Sullivan, you can't parody a parody, right? And Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream is, I think, one of the funniest plays ever written. It's always frightening as a director to encounter the scenes of comedy, because you go, what if they don't laugh in this production? And I remember even when we did the opera, I started with the mechanicals because I was just so desperately worried they wouldn't be funny. I don't need to worry. We didn't change the words, we didn't stuff around with it, it's actually funny.
Thank Kate and